Elkmont sits down the ridge like a row of broken teeth. Old cabins with black windows and porches that sag into the weeds. After midnight, the woods were so still I could hear my own breath. That's when the lights came. Not flashlights. Lanterns. Warm, yellow, swinging slow between the cabins, one after another, as if a line of people were walking home from a dance 100 years ago. No footsteps, no voices. Just that steady sway, left to right, like the night itself was carrying them. I followed them to the creek. The stones were wet and slick, the water thin as glass. The lights vanished all at once, snuffed like a hand had closed around each one. I turned to look back at the cabins and found nothing but dark wood and empty windows. Then the creek moved wrong. A string of bright dots slid across the water's skin, no source to cast them, curving toward the bank at my boots. The smell of old kerosene rose from the cold. Something stood in front of me I could not see, and in the air between us, a match struck itself, flared, held steady at chest height, and for a heartbeat, the flame lit a face that wasn't there at all. That was 3 months ago. My first week at Whitman's Ridge Lodge. I'm Caleb Dockery, and before you ask, yes, I'm kin to the Dockery family that's been in these mountains since before the park swallowed up half the homesteads. My great-granddaddy used to run Shine through Roaring Fork until the Rangers came. Now I pour coffee for tourists who think they're roughing it because their cabin doesn't have Wi-Fi. The job posting showed up on Craigslist after my shift at the Pigeon Forge Dollywood parking lot ended badly. Night caretaker wanted, remote mountain lodge, must be comfortable with isolation and wildlife. The pay was double what I made waving cars into spots, and after living in a studio apartment above Aunt Bee's candy kitchen for 8 months, isolation sounded like paradise. Ezra Whitman met me at the Cherokee Trading Post on Highway 441, where the road splits toward Cades Cove. Tall man, maybe 60, with hands like leather and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. His pickup truck, a faded blue Ford from the Clinton years, had Tennessee Wildlife Commission stickers peeling off the back window. "You familiar with these mountains, son?" he asked as we wound up the gravel road past the old CCC camp markers. I told him about growing up in Cosby, hunting with my daddy before he died, knowing every ridge and hollow between Gatlinburg and the North Carolina line. "Good," he said. "City folks don't last up here. Mountains got their own way of doing things." The lodge squatted on a clearing overlooking Little River, built from logs so old the chinking between them had turned black. Solar panels gleamed on the metal roof, and a generator hummed somewhere behind the main building. 6 guest cabins dotted the meadow like scattered dice. "Simple work," Ezra explained. "Check the guests, secure the buildings, watch for bears, keep the peace." He handed me a laminated card. "Follow these exactly, no exceptions." That's when I should have left. The laminated card felt warm in my hands, like it had been sitting in sunlight. 6 rules, typed in courier font that reminded me of old government paperwork. Whitman's Ridge Lodge, night caretaker, protocols, lock all guests PM sharp. Use the master keyring. Do not enter any cabin if you hear voices inside after midnight. The main lodge kitchen must remain lit between sunset and sunrise. If the overhead bulb burns out, replace it immediately from the supply closet. Never let the kitchen go dark. If guests report visitors tapping on windows or doors after 1 a.m., do not investigate. Log the complaint and advise them to keep curtains drawn until morning. Check the river trail marker every 2 hours. The painted blaze should be white. If it appears red or any other color, radio base camp immediately and return to the lodge. The old root cellar behind cabin 6 stays padlocked at all times. If you find the lock missing or damaged, do not enter. Call Ezra Whitman's emergency number. Between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., remain inside the main lodge. Do not go outside for any reason during this hour, regardless of what you see or hear. Questions? Ezra asked, watching me read. What kind of visitors tap on windows at 1 in the morning? Mountain folk sometimes get confused about which cabins are theirs. His answer came too quick, rehearsed. Especially the older ones who remember when these were family homesteads. I wanted to ask about the red blaze in the root cellar, but Ezra was already walking toward his truck. Radios on Channel 7. Emergency supplies are in the office closet. Paydays every 2 weeks. Cash only. The engine started with a wheeze of blue smoke. One more thing, Caleb. Your family's been in these mountains a long time. Trust what your blood knows, not what your eyes see. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with 30,000 acres of national forest and 6 rules that made less sense the longer I stared at them. The first guests arrived around 4 o'clock, a family from Ohio with matching hiking boots and enough gear to climb Everest. The Hendersons, according to my clipboard. Mom, Dad, 2 teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I showed them to cabin 3, explained the meal schedule, pointed out the trail markers. Is it safe to hike at night? The father asked, adjusting his expensive camera strap. I wouldn't recommend it. Easy to get turned around in the dark. But the website mentioned night photography opportunities, not during my shift. The words came out harder than I intended. Lodge policy. By 8 p.m., all 6 cabins were occupied. Retired couple in cabin 1, young honeymooners in cabin 2. The Henderson family, 2 women from Atlanta who kept talking about digital detox and finding themselves. Last was cabin 6, a man traveling alone who signed the register as J. Murphy and paid in cash without making eye contact. I started my rounds at 11, master keyring jangling against my belt like wind chimes. The night air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. October in the Smokies meant the tourists were thinning out, but the mountains themselves felt more awake, more watchful. Cabin 1, locked. The elderly couple's television flickered blue through drawn curtains. Cabin 2, locked, soft music and laughter from inside. Cabin 3, locked. The Henderson father stood at his window, camera pressed to the glass, trying to photograph something in the darkness. Cabin 4, locked. The Atlanta women had hung dream catchers in both front windows. Cabin 5, locked, dark and quiet. Cabin 6, locked. But as I turned the key, I heard Jay Murphy talking to someone. The conversation was muffled, but definitely 2 voices, his baritone and something higher, softer. A woman, maybe. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. The voices stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, wood grain rough against my skin. Nothing but the settling of old timber and the distant hoot of a great horned owl. Maybe he was on the phone. Maybe he'd brought someone who hadn't registered. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Rule 1 echoed in my head. Do not enter any cabin if you hear voices inside after midnight. Still 15 minutes until midnight. Technically, but something in my chest, that mountain instinct Ezra had mentioned, told me to walk away. So I did, heading back toward the main lodge as the first wisps of fog began rising from Little River. Behind me, cabin 6's window glowed warm and yellow, like lantern light instead of electric bulbs. I didn't look back. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules. So I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The main lodge kitchen felt bigger at night, shadows pooling in corners that daylight never touched. The overhead fixture, a simple dome light with a 60-watt bulb, cast everything in warm amber. I checked my watch. 12:30 a.m. Rule 2. Keep the kitchen lit between sunset and sunrise. Simple enough. I opened the supply closet and counted 17 replacement bulbs, all the same wattage. Ezra had been thorough. But why this specific room? The guest dining area stayed dark. The office stayed dark. Only the kitchen needed light. I made coffee in the industrial percolator, the kind they used at church fellowship dinners when I was young. The ground smelled like home. Folgers from a red can, strong enough to strip paint. Outside the kitchen window, Little River caught moonlight like scattered coins. The radio crackled. "Caretaker, this is base camp. Radio check." I grabbed the handset. "This is Caleb, all quiet here." "Copy that. Trail marker status." "Trail marker." Rule 4. Check every 2 hours. The painted blaze should be white. "Haven't checked yet. Just finished cabin rounds." "Roger. Base camp out." The trail started behind the lodge, winding down toward the river through stands of hickory and poplar. My flashlight beam swept left and right, picking out familiar mountain shapes. A lightning split oak, a boulder shaped like a crouching bear. The October air had teeth in it, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The marker sat 50 yards down, painted on a smooth-barked beech tree. White paint gleamed in my flashlight beam, fresh and clean, like it had been touched up recently. Nothing strange about it. I turned to head back and heard voices. Not from the cabins. These came from deeper in the woods, drifting through the trees like smoke. 2 people talking, maybe 3. Their words too distant to understand, but their tone easy and conversational. Like neighbors catching up over a fence. The voices moved closer. I switched off the flashlight and listened. Footsteps now, or something like footsteps, the crunch and rustle of boots on dried leaves. But the rhythm was wrong. Too many steps or not enough. Like someone walking on legs they weren't used to. The conversation stopped. In the sudden quiet, I heard my own breathing. The whisper of wind through empty branches. And underneath it all, the sound of someone sniffing. Long, deep breaths, like a hound testing the air. I backed toward the lodge, moving as quiet as I could manage. The kitchen light shone through the window like a beacon. 20 more steps. 15. 10. Something touched the back of my neck. Not fingers. Too cold. Too sharp. Like icicles dragging across my skin. I spun around, flashlight blazing, and found nothing but empty trail and shifting shadows. The voices had stopped. The sniffing had stopped. Even the wind had gone still. I ran the last 10 steps to the lodge, burst through the kitchen door, and locked it behind me. My hands shook as I poured coffee, the cup rattling against the counter. Whatever had been in those woods wasn't human, wasn't natural, wasn't anything that belonged in the Cherokee National Forest I had grown up exploring. At 1:15 a.m., someone knocked on Cabin 2's door. The honeymooners were young, probably mid-20s, and when they called the main lodge, they both sounded genuinely frightened. "There's someone outside our cabin," the woman said. Her name was Lisa, according to my guest register. "They keep knocking, but when we look out the window, nobody's there." "How long has this been going on?" "Maybe 10 minutes. The knocking comes in patterns. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. My husband went to answer it the first time, but I stopped him. Smart woman. Rule 3. If guests report visitors after 1 a.m., don't investigate. Ma'am, I need you and your husband to stay inside. Keep your curtains drawn and don't open the door until morning, no matter who knocks. What? Why? Is this some kind of joke? It's lodge policy. There are wildlife concerns in this area after midnight. Wildlife doesn't knock on doors. Some of the local wildlife around here is different. I kept my voice steady, professional. Trust me on this. Stay inside, keep quiet, and everything will be fine come sunrise. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Lisa's husband took the phone. What kind of place are you running here? A safe one, if you follow the rules. I'm logging your complaint and I'll check on you first thing in the morning. After I hung up, I walked to the kitchen window that faced cabin 2. The small building sat dark and quiet, curtains drawn tight. No movement around the porch or windows. But as I watched, 3 soft knocks echoed across the clearing. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from cabin 2's front door, clear as church bells in the mountain air. But I couldn't see anyone standing there. The porch was empty, the steps were empty, and the ground around the cabin showed no footprints in the beam of the security spotlight. The knocking continued for another hour. At 2:30 a.m., I made my second trail marker check. This time I took the lodge's big mag light and moved faster, eager to get the job done. The white blaze gleamed exactly as it should, clean and fresh against the beech bark. But on the way back, I noticed something new. Footprints in the soft mud beside the trail. Bare feet, human-sized, with toes that seemed too long and nails that had left deep scratches in the earth. They paralleled my path for 30 yards, then turned off into the dense woods toward Elkmont. I counted the prints. Most people left 2 tracks walking. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. These showed groups of 3. Left, right, left, left, right, left. As if whoever made them had an extra leg or was walking with someone else who stepped in perfect sync. The kitchen light was still burning when I got back to the lodge. I checked my watch. 2:45 a.m., 15 minutes until the forbidden hour. Rule 6. Between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., stay inside no matter what. I poured fresh coffee, settled into a chair facing the window, and waited to see what the mountains would show me when the clock struck 3. At 2:58 a.m., the radio went silent. Not off. Silent. The static that had been humming in the background all night just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch on the whole world. I picked up the handset and pressed the talk button. Base camp. This is Caleb. Radio check. Nothing. Base camp, do you copy? Dead air. I checked the battery indicator. Full green. The power cord was plugged in tight, but when I turned the volume knob all the way up, I got the same flat nothing that comes from a radio in a place where radio waves don't exist. The kitchen clock read 2:59. I set my coffee cup down and watched the second hand crawl toward 12. Outside the window, the security lights cast their normal orange glow across the clearing. Cabin lights flickered behind drawn curtains. Little River whispered over its stones 60 yards away. 3 a.m. The security lights went out. Not all at once. They dimmed first, like someone was turning a rheostat, fading from orange to amber to red to black. The guest cabins disappeared into darkness. The only light left in the world was the kitchen fixture above my head and whatever moonlight managed to filter through the October clouds. Then I saw them. People walking between the cabins. Maybe a dozen, moving in single file from the woods toward Little River. They carried lanterns. old-fashioned kerosene lanterns that swung on wire handles and cast warm yellow circles in the darkness, just like the lights I'd seen that first night at Elkmont. I pressed my face to the kitchen window, breath fogging the glass. The figures wore long coats and wide-brimmed hats, clothes from another century. Their lanterns bobbed with each step, creating pools of light that moved like living things across the meadow. One of them stopped directly in front of the main lodge. The lantern light caught a woman's face, pale skin, dark hair pinned back, eyes that reflected the flame like an animal's. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of beauty you see in old photographs from mountain families. Pretty in a hard way, like she'd earned it through struggle. She smiled at me through the window. Her teeth were brown and broken, filed to points. The other figures kept walking toward the river, but she stayed put, holding her lantern high and grinning with those awful teeth. Then she raised her free hand and tapped on the glass with one finger. Tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm that had been haunting cabin 2. I stumbled backward from the window, knocking over my coffee cup. Brown liquid spread across the counter and dripped onto the floor. When I looked back, she was gone. But her lantern sat on the lodge's front porch, flame dancing behind dirty glass. The radio crackled back to life. All units, be advised. We have reports of trespassers in the Elkmont Historic District. Adult individuals carrying open flames. Approach with caution. I grabbed the handset. Base camp. This is Whitman's Ridge caretaker. I'm seeing the same thing here. Whitman's Ridge. Stand by. Static filled the channel for 30 seconds. Then a different voice came through. Older, more formal. Official. Caretaker Dockery. This is Park Service Dispatch. Are you secure in the main lodge? Yes, sir. But there are people outside carrying lanterns. They're not supposed to be here. Copy that. Do not attempt to make contact. Do not leave the building. These individuals are part of an ongoing investigation. What kind of investigation? Classified. Maintain your position until 0400 hours. Dispatch out. The line went dead again. I checked the trail marker at 3:30, breaking my own rule about staying inside. But the radio had said to maintain position, not that I couldn't do my job. The distinction felt important, like splitting hairs with a straight razor. The white blaze was gone, not painted over. Gone. The beech tree showed clean bark where the marker should have been, as if it had never existed. But I knew exactly which tree it was. I'd checked it twice already tonight. I played my flashlight beam across the neighboring trees, looking for fresh paint. Nothing. Then I heard singing. Women's voices, maybe 6 or 7 of them, harmonizing on an old hymn I recognized from my grandmother's church. Precious Lord, take my hand. The melody drifted through the forest like smoke, beautiful and mournful and completely out of place at 3:30 in the morning on a wilderness trail. The singing came from the direction of Elkmont. I followed the sound for maybe 50 yards, staying on the trail but moving toward the abandoned settlement. The voices grew clearer. Definitely women, definitely hymns. But the words weren't quite right. They sang in English, but with pronunciations that sounded colonial, like they'd learned the songs from someone who remembered when these mountains were Cherokee hunting grounds. Through the trees, I saw lights. Not lanterns this time, cook fires, orange flames dancing in stone circles, casting shadows on cabin walls that should have been empty ruins. Smoke rose straight up in the still air, carrying the scent of burning oak and something else. Roasting meat. The singing stopped. I stood alone in the woods with my flashlight and my racing heart, listening to the pop and crackle of fires that couldn't exist. Then a woman's voice called out from the direction of Elkmont, clear as a bell. "Caleb Dockery, your great-granddaddy made the finest corn liquor in Sevier County. Come sit with us, child. We got stories to tell." The voice belonged to the woman who'd tapped on the lodge window. I was sure of it. I ran. Back up the trail, through the trees, my boots skidding on wet leaves and loose stones. Behind me, laughter echoed through the forest. Not cruel, exactly, but knowing. Like they'd expected me to run, like they'd run the same test on others before me. The lodge kitchen was exactly as I'd left it. Coffee spilled across the counter, radio humming with static, overhead light burning steady and true. But the lantern was gone from the front porch. At 3:55, my watch stopped. The second hand froze between 11 and 12, quivering like it wanted to move but couldn't. I tapped the crystal with my fingernail. Nothing. The battery was fine. The date still showed. The alarm setting still worked. Only time itself had stopped. Outside the kitchen window, dawn began to break 5 minutes early. Not sunrise, dawn. The slow lightening of sky that comes before the sun shows itself, gray creeping into black, like watercolors bleeding on wet paper. The security lights flickered back to life. The guest cabins reappeared from shadow. At exactly 4 a.m. by the kitchen clock, my watch started ticking again. The radio squawked. "Whitman's Ridge, this is base camp. Status report." I keep the microphone. "All secure. Quiet night." "Roger that. Any issues with the trail marker?" I looked at the laminated card with the 6 rules, still sitting on the counter where Ezra had left it. Rule 4, the blaze should be white. "Marker's fine," I said. "White paint, fresh and clean." "Copy. Base camp out." I walked to the kitchen window and looked toward the river trail. Even from this distance, I could see the white blaze on the beech tree, bright as fresh snow. It was there again, like it had never left. First light crept over Klingman's dome like spilled milk, gray and cold. I stood at the kitchen window, watching mist rise from Little River while my coffee grew cold in the cup. The lantern woman's smile lingered behind my eyes. Those filed teeth, sharp as broken bottles. The Henderson family emerged from cabin 3 at 7 a.m., backpacks loaded for their hike to Cataract Falls. The father adjusted his camera strap and waved. "Beautiful morning," he called out. "We heard the most amazing singing last night around 3. Sounded like an old-time gospel revival." "Where did it come from?" "Down toward those old cabins you can see through the trees. Elkmont, right?" My wife thought about walking down to listen, but the kids were sleeping. Thank God they'd stayed put. Rule 6 had saved them without them knowing it. Lisa from cabin 2 looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her husband stood beside her on the porch, both clutching coffee mugs like lifelines. "The knocking quit around 4, she said when I checked on them. But we kept hearing someone walking around our cabin. Slow circles, like they were looking for a way in." "You see anyone?" "That's the thing. We looked out the window a dozen times. Nothing there. But the footsteps never stopped." Her husband rubbed his stubbled jaw. "We're checking out early. This place gives me the creeps." I helped them load their car, glad to see them go. Some people weren't meant for places like this, where the rules between living and dead got fuzzy. Jay Murphy was different. When I knocked on cabin 6, he opened the door before my knuckles touched wood, like he'd been watching through the window. "You need to see something," he said, stepping aside. Inside, he'd moved all the furniture. The bed blocked the back window. The table barricaded the door. A perfect circle of table salt covered the floor around the entrance. "You always travel with salt?" when I visit thin places. Murphy grabbed a leather journal from the dresser. Places where the membrane between worlds gets worn down. He opened to a page covered in newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. 1934. The Bramham family vanishes from their home near Elkmont. 7 people, gone overnight. Searchers find their supper still warm on the table. Next page. 1952. Park ranger reports ghost lights moving through abandoned Elkmont cabins during winter months. Describes voices singing hymns in languages that weren't quite English. Another page. 1967. University of Tennessee graduate student interviews Cherokee elders about Little River Valley. They call this area Cayuga, the place where spirits cross over. I studied the photocopied articles, local papers, Park Service documents, academic research, all describing encounters like mine. The Cherokee avoided this valley for good reason, Murphy continued. Said the boundary was too thin here, too easy for the dead to step through. When white settlers came, some learned to respect that boundary. Others. He pointed toward the root cellar behind cabin 6. Others tried to control it. Through the window, the stone structure squatted like a toad. Even in daylight, it radiated wrongness. Too solid, too permanent for simple storage. What's down there? Something that should have been left alone. Murphy flipped through more pages. The woman who visited us last night, she appears in accounts going back over a century. Always the same face, same clothes, same lantern. Local families called her Sarah Mingus. Mingus, my great-grandmother's maiden name, carved on weathered headstones in Cosby Cemetery. Mountain families intermarried for generations, Murphy said, watching my face. You're probably kin to half the spirits in these hills, including her? Family resemblance is strong in these mountains, strong enough that blood calls to blood, especially in places like this. At noon, I called Ezra. He picked up immediately. How was your night? Educational. I need answers about Sarah Mingus and what's locked in that root cellar. Silence stretched between us like a held breath. Rules getting clearer to you? The rules are fine. It's everything else that's got me confused. Meet me at Mingus Mill at sunset, just you. The line went dead. I spent the afternoon on routine maintenance, checking propane connections, testing backup generators, replacing a cracked window in cabin 4. Normal work that felt good after the strangeness of the previous night. At 4 p.m., I hiked down to check the trail marker. The white blaze gleamed fresh against beech bark, exactly as it should. But something new caught my eye. Scratches below the paint. 5 parallel gouges, each 3 inches long, carved deep into the wood. I touched the marks. They felt old, weathered smooth, but I could swear they hadn't been there during my morning check. On the way back, I circled the root cellar. The padlock was secure, heavy brass turned green with age. But the chain was new, thick steel links that gleamed like they'd been installed recently. Behind the structure, I found claw marks in the stone foundation. Deep gouges that ran from 4 feet up the wall down to ground level, as if something inside had tried to dig its way out. The scratches were old, but somehow fresh, like wounds that wouldn't heal. A sound came from inside the cellar. Soft scraping, like fingernails on stone. I backed away, every instinct my great-granddaddy had taught me screaming danger. Whatever was down there had noticed my attention. At 5:30, I secured the guest cabins and drove toward Mingus Mill, following the winding road through Cade's Cove as shadows lengthened across the valley. The old grist mill sat beside a creek that ran clear and cold, its water wheel turning slow and steady like it had for over a century. Ezra's truck was already parked in the gravel lot. He stood beside the mill race, watching water flow through the wooden channels that powered the grinding stones. "Your great-granddaddy helped build this wheel," he said without turning around. "Back in 1886, when the Mingus family still owned the land." Murphy says Sarah Mingus has been haunting Elkmont for over 100 years. Sarah's not haunting anything. She's working. Ezra faced me, his weathered features serious in the dying light. "Your family made an agreement with something old and hungry, something that came through when the Cherokee boundary got broken." "What kind of agreement?" "The kind that keeps things contained. The Mingus family, the Whitmans, a few others. We've been keeping the bargain for 5 generations." The water wheel creaked as it turned, grinding corn that wouldn't feed anyone, maintaining motions that kept old promises alive. "What's in the root cellar?" "The first thing that came through, the one that taught the others how to cross over." Ezra picked up a stone from the creek bed, turning it over in his calloused hands. "It's been down there since 1897, fed just enough to keep it quiet. Fed just enough to keep it from calling more of its kind." "Fed what?" "Blood, boy. Family blood. The only thing that satisfies it." He dropped the stone back into the rushing water. "Why do you think I hired a Mingus descendant?" The creek water rushed over smooth stones, carrying the sound of grinding corn and old secrets. Ezra Whitman sat on a fallen log beside the mill race, looking older than his 60 years. "Your great-great-grandmother Sarah Mingus was 19 when it happened," he began. "October 1897. Revenue agents were raiding stills all through Sevier County, and her daddy Isaac had a prime setup back in Rocky Hollow. Big operation. 3 copper stills, sugar cache hidden in a cave, distribution network that ran all the way to Nashville." I settled beside him on the log. The water wheel kept turning, creaking like old bones. "Sarah was supposed to be the lookout that night, stationed on the ridge above the hollow, watching for federal agents or local law. But something went wrong. She saw lights coming through the trees. Not torch lights or lantern lights. Something else. Something cold." Ezra picked up a stick and traced patterns in the mud at his feet. "The Cherokee had warnings about that hollow. Called it Atsilagodohi, place where fire dies. Said it was a thin spot where things could slip through from the other side. Isaac Mingus didn't believe in Indian superstitions. He believed in good water and hidden locations." "What did Sarah see?" "A hunting party. But not human hunters." Ezra snapped the stick in half. "Things that looked like people from a distance but moved wrong, smelled wrong, sounded wrong when they talked. They came through the boundary looking for heat, for life, for something to sustain them in our world." The mill wheel creaked louder, as if the story was winding up its own machinery. "Sarah tried to warn her daddy and his crew, but it was too late. The things found the still operation, found 5 men working around open flames. The heat drew them like moths to a porch light." Ezra's voice dropped. "By morning, there were bodies scattered through the hollow, torn apart, drained dry, but not eaten, fed from... Fed from? The things couldn't digest our food, couldn't process our world the way living creatures do. But they could absorb life force, especially from blood that carried strong emotional content. Fear, pain, terror. Those flavors made the feeding more sustaining." My stomach turned. What happened to Sarah? She survived by hiding in a laurel thicket until dawn. When she came down to the hollow, she found one of the creatures still there, too gorged to move quickly. It had taken the shape of her cousin Boyd, Not perfectly, but close enough to fool someone who wasn't looking careful. Ezra stood and walked to the mill's wooden housing, running his hands over the weathered boards. That thing followed her home, started appearing around the family farm, wearing Boyd's face, but getting the details wrong. Wrong height, wrong voice, wrong memories. It wanted more feeding, but it also wanted something else. A permanent way to stay in our world without having to hunt constantly. An agreement. Sarah's grandmother knew the old ways, remembered Cherokee warnings about thin places and hungry spirits. She helped Sarah work out terms. The creature would stop hunting randomly, stop calling others through the boundary. In exchange, the family would provide regular sustenance. The water wheel ground corn that would never feed anyone, maintaining motions that kept promises alive. How regular? New moon, every month. One family member would make the walk down to what's now the root cellar. They'd open their wrist with a sharp knife, let blood drip into the feeding trough, and lock the door tight again. I thought about the claw marks on the cellar walls, the heavy chain, the padlock that looked ancient but maintained. What happens if nobody feeds it? It starts calling, sends out signals that draw others through the boundary. More of its kind, looking for the same arrangement. Sarah's grandmother understood that one contained predator was better than dozens of hunting ones. Ezra turned to face me. The Mingus family kept the bargain for 60 years, fed it, contained it, kept the boundary stable. What changed? Sarah's nephew Marcus was the last direct male descendant. He died in Korea in 1953, left no sons. The feeding responsibility passed to his sister Catherine, but she moved to California after her husband came back from the war. Broke the chain. The mill wheel kept turning, but something in its rhythm felt different now, strained, like machinery working against resistance. That's when my family got involved. The Whitmans had always known about the arrangement, helped maintain the containing structure, provided backup when the Mingus family needed support. When Catherine left, we took over the monthly obligations. For how long? 40 years. 2 generations of Whitman blood, keeping that thing fed and quiet. Ezra picked up another stone from the creek bed. But my son died in a logging accident 5 years ago, and my grandson moved to Atlanta for college. I'm the last one left, and I'm getting too old to make the walk every month. The pieces started clicking together in my head. That's why you hired me. Family blood works best. Mingus blood works better than Whitman blood. Direct descendant blood works better than cousin blood. He dropped the stone into the rushing water. You're Sarah's great-great-grandson, straight-line descent. Your blood carries the original agreement. You want me to feed that thing. I want you to keep the boundary stable. The creature's been getting restless lately. My blood isn't satisfying it the way it used to. Last month, it barely touched what I offered. Started scratching at the cellar walls, making sounds like it was trying to call out. What happens if it breaks free? It remembers where the boundary is thin, calls others through. Within a year, these mountains would be crawling with things that wear human faces, but hunt human lives. Ezra walked back to his truck. The lodge rules exist to protect guests from overflow activity. But if the main source breaks containment, rules won't be enough. I followed him to the parking area. What if I refuse? Then you drive back to Pigeon Forge and forget you ever saw Whitman's Ridge. I'll make the next monthly feeding myself, probably my last one. After that, he shrugged. After that, this becomes someone else's problem. When's the next new moon? Tomorrow night. The timing felt deliberate, orchestrated. Like Ezra had been planning this conversation for months, waiting for the right moment to reveal the family curse. The rules I gave you cover normal lodge operations, but tomorrow night, you'll get different instructions, specific procedures for the feeding ritual. He climbed into his truck cab. Think about it, Caleb. Think about what your great-great-grandmother would want you to do. The engine started with a wheeze of blue smoke. One more thing. The woman you've been seeing, Sarah herself, she's not trying to hurt anyone. She's trying to make sure the agreement gets honored. She appears when the feeding schedule gets disrupted, when the bargain looks like it might be broken. Is she really dead? She's what's left of someone who made a deal with something that shouldn't exist. Part ghost, part guardian, part warning system. Ezra put the truck in gear. Tomorrow night, you'll understand the difference. I stood beside Mingus Mill as his taillights disappeared around the bend, listening to the water wheel turn and the creek flow over stones worn smooth by a century of mountain weather. Somewhere in those sounds, I could almost hear singing. Women's voices harmonizing on hymns older than the mill, older than the agreement, older than the boundary between, too thin for safety. But white settlers had come anyway, drawn by good water and hidden valleys, willing to make bargains they didn't fully understand. Now I was the inheritor of those bargains. The last Mingus descendant within driving distance, the one with blood old enough and strong enough to satisfy something that had been feeding on my family for over a century. I drove back to Whitman's Ridge Lodge as full darkness settled over the Smokies. Tomorrow night, I'd learn what it really meant to be a caretaker in these mountains. Tomorrow night, I'd find out if family loyalty was stronger than self-preservation. In the rearview mirror, Mingus Mill grew smaller and smaller, its water wheels still turning in the darkness, grinding corn for spirits that would never taste bread. The lodge stood empty under a starless sky. Ezra had cleared out every guest except Jay Murphy, who'd locked himself in cabin 6 with enough salt to cure a side of bacon. The silence felt heavy, like the mountain itself was waiting. I spread the new instructions across the kitchen table. Different handwriting this time. Feminine cursive that belonged to another century. Sarah Mingus had written these rules herself, sometime after 1897. Blood covenant, new moon feeding. Preparation begins at first dark. Fast for 6 hours before the ritual. Gather materials from cellar supply box. Iron knife, bone handle, collection basin, brass, 3 candles, beeswax, flint striker. Walk to the containment structure at midnight exactly. Light candles around the offering trough. Open feeding aperture. Make cut on dominant hand. Palm center. Deep enough for steady flow. Fill basin with 4 measures of blood. Pour through aperture slowly. Wait for recognition response. Entity will acknowledge acceptable offering. Seal aperture. Extinguish candles. Return immediately. Warning. If entity refuses offering, do not attempt second feeding. Inadequate blood will strengthen rather than satisfy. Seek family elder counsel immediately. The warning was underlined in faded red ink that might once have been blood. At 11 p.m., I gathered the materials from a wooden box hidden behind the main supply closet. The iron knife felt ancient in my hands, its bone handle worn smooth by generations of Mingus palms. 3 beeswax candles sat beside a brass basin decorated with symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Outside, the October wind carried scents of dying leaves and something else. Something that smelled like old meat and wet earth. The root cellar waited in absolute darkness. No moon, no stars. Just the solid black of mountain night. My flashlight beam found the feeding trough carved into the stone foundation. A shallow depression stained dark by decades of offerings. I arranged the candles around the trough. When I struck the flint, the first flame caught immediately, burning steady and warm. The second candle flickered, but held. The third candle fought me. The flame kept dying, as if something was blowing on it from inside the sealed cellar. From below came the sound of movement. Not walking, sliding, like something large shifting position in a confined space. My watch showed 11:58. Time to honor a covenant my family had kept for over a century. I pressed the knife point to my palm, just below the lifeline where Sarah's instructions indicated. The blade bit deep, opening skin cleanly. Blood welled up dark and warm, flowing steadier than I'd expected. The feeding aperture was a square slot cut into the cellar door, just large enough for a man's hand. When I slid it open, darkness thick as tar spilled out, carrying the stench of something that had been underground too long. 1 measure of blood in the basin, 2 measures. My palm throbbed, but the flow continued strong. 3 measures. 4. The movement below stopped completely. I lifted the basin to the aperture and began pouring slowly, letting each drop find its way through the slot. The sound echoed strangely, not splashing into a trough, but hitting something soft and wet. Something that swallowed. I waited for the recognition response, the subtle sound or movement that meant the entity had accepted the offering. 30 seconds. Nothing. 1 minute. Still, nothing. At 2 minutes, a new sound rose from the cellar. Not satisfaction, but hunger. Deep, gnawing hunger that had been awakened rather than fed. The candle flames began bending toward the aperture, as if the thing below was drawing air and light into itself. 3 minutes passed. According to Sarah's warning, I should seal the aperture and find family elder council immediately. But Ezra was the only elder left, and inadequate blood would make the situation worse. At 4 minutes, the creature spoke. More. The voice wasn't human. It sounded like stones grinding together, like water flowing over broken glass. It came from directly below the aperture, close enough that I could feel cold breath on my fingers. More little Mingus. More warm blood from living veins. The scratching started then, long gouges being carved into the cellar's stone walls. Not random scratching, but deliberate patterns. Symbols that matched the ones on the brass basin. Your blood tastes of fear and doubt, the voice continued. Not like Sarah's blood. Not like the old compact. The first candle went out. Sarah's blood tasted of conviction, of willing sacrifice. Your blood. Another gouge in the stone. Your blood tastes like a man who doesn't understand what he's feeding. The second candle died. By the light of the remaining flame, I watched dark liquid seep through the aperture. Not flowing out, but flowing up, defying gravity. It spread across the cellar door in patterns that looked almost like writing. The compact is broken, descendant of Sarah. Your bloodline has grown weak with city living and doubt. The old hunger grows strong while the feeding grows poor. Something struck the door from inside. The impact shook dust from the stone walls and made the iron hinges scream. The third candle guttered and died. In the absolute darkness, I heard Sarah Mingus speak my name. Caleb. Her voice came from beside the feeding trough, clear and urgent. You need to run. Now. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking. The beam found Sarah standing 3 feet away, no longer wearing the sinister smile I'd seen before. Her face showed desperate worry, the expression of someone watching a century of careful work fall apart. The blood wasn't enough, she said. 5 generations of intermarriage weakened the line. The creature's been feeding on ambient fear and anger from the living world, growing stronger while our offerings grew weaker. Another impact from inside. The upper hinge cracked, leaving the door hanging at a dangerous angle. What do I do? Run for the lodge. Get the salt from Murphy's cabin. He understands protective circles. Make a barrier and hold it until sunrise. What about containment? Containment's finished. It tasted your blood and found it wanting, but the taste gave it enough strength to break free. Sarah pointed toward the dark woods surrounding Elkmont. Others are coming through now. The boundary is collapsing. Lights appeared between the trees, dozens of lanterns swinging in procession, carried by figures that moved wrong, walked wrong, existed wrong in the living world. The cellar door exploded outward. What emerged looked like Boyd Mingus, Sarah's cousin from 1897, but every detail was corrupted. Too tall, joints bending backward, skin that moved like water over bones that weren't quite the right shape. It wore Boyd's face the way a man might wear an ill-fitting mask. When it saw me, it smiled with teeth filed to points. "Mingus blood," it said, voice like grinding millstones. 5 generations of feeding, and this is what the bloodline produces. Weak tea instead of strong whiskey. It took a step forward, testing its freedom. No matter, there are others now. Others who remember what real sacrifice tastes like. I ran for the lodge, my wounded hand leaving droplets of blood on leaves and stones. Behind me, the creature laughed, a sound like breaking bones and tearing cloth. The lantern procession had reached the edge of the clearing. Dozens of figures in old-fashioned clothes, carrying flames that cast no shadows, walking with the patient purpose of hunters who had finally caught their prey's scent. Murphy's salt circle was the only sanctuary left, and sunrise was still 6 hours away. I sprinted across the clearing, my wounded hand clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. Behind me, the Boyd thing's laughter echoed through the trees, joined by voices that sounded like wind through broken glass. Murphy's cabin door opened before I reached the porch steps. "Get inside," he barked, grabbing my jacket and hauling me through the entrance. "Now." He slammed the door and threw 3 different locks. Deadbolt, chain, and something that looked like it belonged on a medieval castle. The interior blazed with electric light from every lamp and fixture in the place. "The salt circle," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Sarah said, "Already done." Murphy pointed to the floor. The entire cabin interior was surrounded by an unbroken line of white salt, thick as my thumb and perfectly circular. I heard the cellar door give way. Been preparing for the last hour. Through the windows, I could see the lantern procession spreading across the lodge grounds. Dozens of figures now, maybe more, moving between the empty guest cabins with predatory patience. They wore clothes from different eras, Civil War uniforms, Depression-era dresses, work clothes from the CCC days. All dead, all hungry. What are they? Spirits that got trapped when the boundary collapsed in 1897. They've been waiting over a century for another chance to cross fully into the living world. Murphy pulled a shotgun from under his bed. Rock salt loads. Won't kill them, but it might discourage close contact. The Boyd creature appeared at the front window, pressing its face against the glass. Up close, I could see how wrong the features were. Skin that moved like liquid, eyes that reflected light from angles that didn't exist, a mouth that opened too wide when it spoke. "Joseph Murphy," it said, voice muffled by the glass. "Still playing with Cherokee protective circles, I see. Still hiding behind traditions you barely understand." Murphy ignored it, checking his ammunition. "Don't talk to them. Don't acknowledge them. Attention feeds them as much as blood does." The creature at the window smiled, showing teeth like broken pottery. "And little Caleb Dockery, last of the Mingus line. Your blood tastes like disappointment, boy. Like a family that forgot what it was supposed to remember. 3 more figures appeared at the other windows. Women in long dresses, men in old-fashioned suits, all wearing faces that had been dead for decades. They began tapping on the glass in the same rhythm I'd heard at cabin 2. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. How long until sunrise? I asked. Murphy checked his watch. 5 hours. Maybe a little less. A child's voice came from outside, high and sweet, like someone calling for their mother. Please let me in. I'm lost. I'm cold. Please help me. I looked toward the sound and saw a little girl standing beside the salt circle, maybe 8 years old, wearing a nightgown that looked like it belonged to the 1920s. She had the same filed teeth as the others. That's Emma Greer, Murphy said quietly. Disappeared from her family's homestead in 1923. They found her dress beside Little River, but never found her body. Emma walked around the salt circle, testing its boundaries. Where her bare feet touched the salt line, white granules turned black and began smoking. The circle won't hold forever, Murphy said. Salt is a barrier, not a fortress. If they find a weak spot, or if we break the line somehow. Then what? Then we become part of their procession. Dead but not gone, hungry but never satisfied. The tapping at the windows grew louder, more insistent. The Boyd creature had been joined by 6 others, all pressing against the glass with faces that shifted and changed, like reflections in disturbed water. At 2 a.m., they began singing. Old hymns at first, Amazing Grace, Rock of Ages, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. But the words were wrong, corrupted, turned inside out until they sounded like curses instead of prayers. The harmonies were perfect, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache with longing. Don't listen too close, Murphy warned. Their music is designed to call the living toward death. It's how they hunt. I plugged my ears with my fingers, but the singing seemed to come from inside my head as much as outside the cabin. Sweet voices promising rest, peace, an end to all the fears and responsibilities of living. Just step outside. Just break the circle. Just join the procession that had been waiting so long for new members. At 3 a.m., Sarah Mingus appeared inside the salt circle. She materialized next to the fireplace, solid and real as anyone living. But the other spirits outside began howling when they saw her, pressing harder against the windows until I heard glass starting to crack. They can't cross the salt, she said to Murphy. But I can. I'm bound to the family line, not trapped by the boundary collapse. Why are you helping us? Murphy asked, keeping his shotgun trained on the windows. Because this is my fault, my family's fault. We made a bargain we didn't fully understand with something that shouldn't exist. Sarah looked at me with eyes full of regret. The creature in the cellar wasn't the first to cross over. It was the scout, the one that came through to test the boundary and call the others. How many others? All of them. Everyone who died in these mountains under violent or unnatural circumstances. Everyone who got lost in the woods and never came home. Everyone who made deals with things they shouldn't have dealt with. She gestured toward the windows. They've been waiting on the other side, growing hungry, growing angry. Tonight's failed feeding gave them enough strength to cross over permanently. Outside, the singing stopped. The figures at the windows began backing away, disappearing into the darkness between the cabins. What are they doing? I asked. Murphy was already moving, checking his ammunition, adjusting his grip on the shotgun. Regrouping, getting ready for a coordinated assault. The salt circle, will hold against individual spirits, but if they all rush at once, if they hit it from multiple directions simultaneously. He shook his head. Protective circles work on principle. Overwhelming force can break any principle. Sarah walked to the window facing the woods. They're gathering at the edge of the clearing, forming ranks like an army. Through the glass, I could see lantern lights arranging themselves in neat lines, dozens of them, maybe more than 100. Spirits from every era of mountain history, united by hunger and the promise of permanent return to the living world. There's something else, Sarah said. The boundary collapse isn't limited to this location. It's spreading. Within a few hours, every thin place in the Appalachians will be compromised. Every battlefield, every old cemetery, every place where the dead were buried in unhallowed ground. How do we stop it? You can't. But you might be able to contain it. She pointed toward my wounded hand. Your blood failed to satisfy the creature, but it's still Mingus blood, still connected to the original compact. I don't understand. A willing sacrifice, full bloodletting, offered not to feed the creature, but to rebuild the boundary. Your life, freely given, might be enough to seal the crossing place and trap the spirits on the other side again. Murphy lowered his shotgun. There has to be another way. There is. Sarah smiled sadly. You could all run. Drive away, leave the mountains, let the spirits spread across the country like a plague. Someone else can deal with the consequences. Through the window, I watched the spirit army begin its advance. 100 lanterns moving in perfect formation, carried by the hungry dead who had waited over a century for this moment. Dawn was still 3 hours away. The spirit army reached the salt circle at 4:15 a.m. They came from all sides, Civil War soldiers with musket wounds, children in nightgowns, women in Depression-era dresses, men in CCC work clothes. The lantern light cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they surrounded Murphy's protective barrier. Ready? I asked Sarah, the ceremonial knife heavy in my palm. She nodded. When you break the circle, I'll guide your spirit back to the boundary. Your willing sacrifice should provide enough power to seal the crossing place permanently. Murphy grabbed my shoulder. Wait, look at them. The spirits had stopped just outside the salt line, but they weren't preparing to attack. Instead, they were turning away from the cabin, looking back toward the woods with expressions of fear and confusion. The Boyd creature appeared at the window again, but its face showed panic instead of hunger. Something's wrong, it said, pressing against the glass. Something's coming that shouldn't be here. A new light appeared in the forest, not the warm yellow of kerosene lanterns, but cold white light that hurt to look at directly. It moved between the trees with purpose, growing brighter as it approached the clearing. Cherokee spirits, Sarah whispered. The original guardians of this place. The white light resolved into dozens of figures wearing traditional Cherokee clothing, carrying torches that burned without fuel. They moved in formation around the clearing, surrounding the Confederate and settler spirits with calm authority. An elderly Cherokee woman stepped forward, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Her voice carried the weight of mountains and centuries, firm but not angry. The settler spirits began backing away from her words, their lantern flames dimming. She's telling them to go home, Sarah translated, reminding them that they're trespassing on sacred ground without permission. The Boyd creature hammered on the window. This isn't over, Mingus. The compact still exists. The creature still needs feeding. No, Sarah said firmly. The compact is void. You broke containment, violated the terms. The Cherokee Guardians have authority here now. The white light grew brighter, and I heard singing. not the corrupted hymns from earlier, but traditional Cherokee chants that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. The settlers' spirits began fading, their forms becoming translucent as the boundary pulled them back toward the thing with rage as the Cherokee spirits escorted it back across the boundary. "This land remembers," it hissed. "This land always remembers." Then silence returned to Whitman's Ridge. The Cherokee woman approached the cabin, her torch burning steady and clean. She spoke again, and though I didn't understand the words, her meaning was clear. The crossing place was sealed, the spirits contained, the boundary restored by older authority than any settler compact. She looked directly at me through the window and nodded once, acknowledgement between people who understood the mountain's deeper truths. Then she and her companions walked back into the forest, their white light fading until only normal darkness remained. Dawn broke over Klingman's Dome exactly at sunrise. I drove away from Whitman's Ridge that morning, my truck loaded with everything I owned. Ezra met me at the Cherokee trading post to settle my final pay. Cash, as promised, plus a bonus for extraordinary circumstances. "The Cherokee Council contacted me an hour ago," he said. "They're reclaiming the land around Elkmont, turning it into a proper sacred site. No more lodge, no more guests, no more caretakers. What about the creature in the cella? Still contained, but under Cherokee jurisdiction now. Their problem, their methods." Ezra lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "My family's done with this business. Finally." I drove back to Cosby, back to the small house where I'd grown up listening to my daddy's stories about these mountains. But now I understood that some stories are warnings, and some warnings should never be forgotten. The Cherokee had always known what we'd learned too late, that some places are too sacred, too dangerous, too thin between worlds for human habitation. Some rules exist for reasons deeper than understanding.